Hi everyone, my name is Dominicarrojado. I'm a web developer, and these are your guides, tips, and tricks to web development. So in my previous video, I showed you how to build a URL shortener API with NestJS and Postgres as your database. So that was part one. This is a continuation for basically writing end-to-end tests for that application. So just a quick recap. Let me show you my screen. So our link shortener API has these features. So I have it running using Docker Compose dev. So just a quick recap of all the features of our link shortener API. So it is possible to get all the links. You'll get an array. Right now, there's nothing in the database. Once we create one, we can now get all the links. And we can also do the redirection, which is the MVP feature of this application. So I'm going to use the same name that I used to create this link. And I should be redirected to this link. Let's test that out. And there you go. You get the HTML page because you are redirected to a web page. And we can also choose to update this link. So if I get this ID right here, update and replace the ID. I want to replace the URL to google.com. There you go. It's successful. And if we try to get all the links again, the URL is now updated. And I can choose to delete this link using the delete API, pass in the ID, and there you go. So those are all the features that we currently have. So if you're not coming from part one and this is your first time visiting this, you can actually skip that video if you just want to learn how to write end-to-end tests in NestJS. So I'm going to add an instruction below in the description below on how you can pull this code without the tests. All right, so yep, let's get started. So I'm just going to pause this Docker Compose running because I want you to install a couple of things. These are the libraries that we'll be utilizing as we write our tests. So NestJS provides testing library utilities that could help us simulate a testing environment for our NestJS application. For super tests, it will help us simulate HTTP requests in a testing environment. And for Faker, it will help us generate random but realistic data that we could use for each of our test cases. And just to quickly show you guys, in NestJS, you have two ways on how to write tests. So first one would be unit tests. So in unit tests, you basically can test individual modules or controllers. So for here, for example, this is writing test for cats controller. You'll basically be mocking the cat service so that whatever is returned by calling a function in the controller, you can do an expectation that the result is the same as what you have mocked for the result of the service. And there's another one, which is basically what we're going to do today, which is to write end-to-end tests. And for end-to-end tests, basically, it is closer to the kind of interaction that end users will have on your production. So you basically simulate a GET request, for example, to test the GET feature of the cats. So using super tests, you'll be doing a request and you expect the JSON response is what you have expected. So I like this more than writing unit tests because there's less mocks and it's easier to maintain because you only write tests for a particular feature. For example, get the get feature, and you don't have to mock individual files to achieve 100% like coverage. So yeah, that's what we'll be doing for today. All right, so let's get started. So I just want to quickly show you guys all the scripts related to the test. So if you go to the package.json, you have the Docker Compose test, which basically runs the test in one time go, and it will exit after running all the tests. So that's the normal way. We also have the Docker Compose semicolon code, or short for coverage. Basically, it does the same thing as line number 23 right here, but with coverage. So you can see how many percentages you have covered in the specific feature. And we have the Docker test watch. So basically, anytime we make changes, it will automatically rerun the test after we save the changes. So this is good. This is what we're going to do most of the time, which is the Docker test watch. So I'm going to run that now. So if this is your first time running this command, it will take some time because you will install all the dependencies and packages in an isolated environment. So yeah. So he has finished running the command, and as you can see from the last logs, there are no tests related to file changes in the last commit. So yeah, we're going to write the test for our links features first. After that, we'll be writing tests for wildcard. So I want you to create a file called links.cs. So this is the convention for the file name for the test files. So we're going to write the test codes right here. So the first one we want to do is to do a describe block. Basically, describe what we are testing. So we'll be testing the links. And yeah, right now, because there's no test cases, you would see an error like this. The test suite must contain at least one test. So don't worry about that for now. We need to set up our application module. To do that, we'll do a before all. So basically, before we run all the test case in this describe block, this needs to run first. So what we need to do is basically create a module reference. Await. So we need to write an asynchronous keyword here and do a test that create testing module. So test is coming from the NestJS testing library. So one of the utilities that we'll be using is the test to create a testing module. So this will help us create a module for our application in a testing environment. And it accepts an object that can accept imports. So this should look familiar for you already. If we have built an application in NestJS, basically imports accepts modules that we will be using in this case. So we'll be using app module. So this contains all of our features for the links module. And after doing that, we need to compile it. So after compiling it, we can get the application itself by creating nest application function. So this is similar to what we have done here in the main.cs. Basically, using the nest factory, we have created the application. So that's similar to this, but in this case, this is the application which is going to be running in the testing environment. And similar to what we did here, if we want to test our validations, we will also need to call app.useGlobalPipes and pass in the validation pipe instance. After that, instead of doing a listen, we'll be using app.initialize. And yeah, now we can do some tests here. I'm just going to extract application. So this will be nest application. So instead of initializing it here, I'm going to do this. So after initializing our application, we want to basically have a clean database whenever we run each of our test cases. So to do that, I want to add a before each right here. Basically clear database or repositories. Because in each test cases, we may be creating a link or deleting a link, and we don't want each of our test cases to be affected because In this case, we're only using one application. That means this application also works with one database. And if each of the test cases are running, we want to ensure that our database is always clean or clear before running each test cases. That makes our test cases not get affected by other test cases. So how do we do this? So basically, we want to get the DB connection. So this is a connection from type ORM. And to get that DB connection, get, and just pass in the connection type. So that's how easy it is to get the DB connection instance. And now we can run different functions right here. What I want to do is basically get all the entities first. And we can do that by getting entity metadata from the DB connection. This will give you an array of entity metadata. I'm just going to add a promises array right here. This will become an array of promises. Since we'll be working with database, it will be asynchronously. And I want to loop entity from entities. So I get the entity object right here. To get the repository of that entity, I can basically do DB connection, get repository, entity. So using the name of that entity, I can get the get repository using the get repository function. And now I can do a clear. So using the promises array, I'm going to push it here and do a repository.clear. All right. So we created a promises array so that we can await until all of the promises that has been pushed has been done before we run each of the test cases. So yeah, so every time we run into a test case, before we run that test case, we want to clear the repositories. So we always have a clean state for each test cases. So now I think we're ready to write our test cases. Let's do the get all links feature. So I just want to write another discard block, and this will be the get. All right. So what test cases should we do? So first of all, let's start by, doing a request and expecting an empty array. So remember, we're always clearing the database. So in this first test case, it should handle without data. So without any data in the database, what should we expect? Basically an empty array. So to do a request, we can do an asynchronous call using requests from the super test. So we need to import it here. Request from super test. All right. So using this request, we can pass in application. So remember, we created the application dot get HTTP server. This is what we pass to the request. And now we can do a get request, and then we need to pass in the path. So this should be /links. All right. So after running this request, what do we expect? We expect the response status to be 200. And we also expect the body to be empty array. Since working with arrays and objects, we cannot use to be for the equality. We need to use to equal. So because, for example, array is not equal to an empty array because they have their own. This is now how we validate two objects or two arrays. So we need to use two equal to really check the equality of these two object or array. So let's see if that test case pass. So it will take some time to run. Oh, we face an error right here, connection from type ORM. This should be okay. So we need to fix this import. It should actually be like this instead of the source folder. So that's why we got this error right here. Okay, so as you can see, the first test case has passed. You can see the checkbox right here, how long the test ran, and the overall time. Great. So that was easy, right? Now comes the next test case, which basically should handle with data. And to simulate this, basically we need to directly create links in the database before we even call this function. So how do we do that? So we can actually have we can actually use the links repository. Let's give this a type, which is what we are getting it from the links repository file right here. And similar to how we got the DB connection, it's actually the same thing. So module ref and get it by just passing the type. So that's really easy for, it's really easy to get any repository, provider, or service or repository and directly make use of it in the testing environment. So I really like this feature of, NestJS testing library. So now I can call links repository, which will be asynchronous, and I want to create a link item. So to create a link item, remember that we call link.create link and just basically pass name and URL. So if you remember, we have installed Faker. Let us generate random data, which is realistic. So this is where it comes in. So just to quickly show you what Faker is, generate massive amounts of fake but realistic data for testing and development. So we'll be using it for our testing. And they have a really large API that's really useful. So for example, you want name, you can have different names right here. And this is how you call it. And it will give you random data, which is for first name. You can also get a gender, which is female, male. And then you can also do random URL as well, which is what we're going to use for creating a link. So in this case, I want to import Faker. Okay, we need to import it. All right, so after you have imported it, we can use that word, that noun for the name. So if you hover onto it, you can see what are the examples it can give you. So that's fine. And then for the URL, you can use the faker.internet.url. So if you can see, it will give you random URL links. Great. So I want to create 3 of this. So I don't want to just create one and expect one link inside the array. I want to at least make a few, right? So I'm going to create a function here, create link item. It's asynchronous. Basically just returns me what we have done. What we have done below so that I can use this and basically create a promise array. array of promises that returns. Oops, sorry, everything is all right. We need to import link entity. All right. So then I want to loop. At least I want to create 3 arrays in this. And create a links count. So how many times you want to create a link? So I want it to be 3. Plus plus. And then I want to push create link item. And I want to await. Await. Promise that all promises. In this case, after all the promises are finished, this will actually give me an array of links. If you can hover, this will be an array of links. So we can use this links array to basically expect the body to be the same as the links. So copying what we have done right here, we expect it to be the status to be 200 as well. And the body should be the same as the links right here. So this would actually result in, sometimes it can be successful, sometimes it's not, because the way the links are created could create an race issue. So in the arrangement of these links might be different from what is returned. So what I like to do instead is basically do an expect array containing links body. Expect that the body contains all the links similar to the links here. And just an extra check. We want the body to also have the length. The length of that array of the body should be the same as how many we have created. In this case, we'll always make sure, even though the arrangement may be different, this will still pass. Okay. And just to do fix this, I want to do like this. All right. So that's it for handling data. If you see the response from the logs, see that this test case also passed. That means our API is working fine with or without data. Great. And yeah, it's really simple to write tests in NestJS. And I really like writing end-to-end tests like this. So next thing we want to test, actually we're pretty much done with the GET request. That's it. We don't do any validation in the links GET. We can now proceed to the post, which is basically creating a link, right? So for creating a link, what you want to do first is the validation. So we shouldn't accept any invalid data. For example, empty string, or it's not even a string, could be a Boolean, it's not accepted. You cannot pass null to name or URL. The URL itself should be a URL. It should not be a string. And yeah, you can use Faker account to generate those. So I'm just going to copy this function that I created so that I'm going to write it right here. So basically what I've done, created a function called create link body. So this is the same as what we've done right here. So I can actually call it above this and do this instead. Pass it to the create link. And yeah, so for create invalid link bodies function, I created this so that in case we need to generate this similar to the update the link, we can generate invalid data. So first we have an invalid payload. So it could be undefined, there's no body, or it's just an empty object. There's no name and URL. And I also created series of invalid names. So first is name is undefined, but we have passed a valid URL. from the valid link, which is created using the create link body. So yeah, we also have a name which is null. That is also an invalid name. If it's a Boolean, it's a number, it's also not accepted. If it's a JSON object, it's also not accepted. If it's an empty string. So I did a similar thing to the URL. And if you're coming from part 1, I think my DTO is incorrect. It should be isURL instead of just isString. So that's why, yeah, I have updated the DTO to make sure that we only accept a valid URL. All right, so that's why even though there's a string, if it's not a URL, we should also reject that payload. All right, so now I can use this function to basically loop through all of this and pass that as a payload. So how can we do that? Let's move to the describe block, and it should, this test case should not accept invalid data. So inside this should be asynchronous. And yep, what we want to do is basically initiate invalid data using create invalid link bodies. So this is an array of invalid things. And then we want to create a promises array. Oops, I did it incorrectly again. All right. So now we want to loop through the invalid data. This would be the payload. And then similar to what we did right here. In this case, this is going to be, oh wait, what I need to do first is basically push. I'm going to do a self-invoking function, which is asynchronous. So that I can create a response right here. And this should be a post request to the links. And how you can send a payload is basically use this .send function after the post and pass in the payload. All right, so you gotta do a post request with this payload. So what do we expect from this response? We expect this response status to be 100 because it's invalid. The data that we have passed is invalid. And we expect the body to be request. You remember when we create link in an empty array, you will get an error message with saying it's a bad request. And also remember there's an array of descriptive messages. So I'm not going to do the exact error messages here because that would be too lengthy. And because we also didn't define that ourselves, those error messages are coming from class validator. So I don't think it's necessary to check those. I just want to make sure that they are returning us an array of string. So to check that, we can basically do a response.body.message is equal to an array containing any string. So it can be any string as long as it's a type of string that this is going to pass. So let's see if this test case has passed. Oh, we need to make sure to do an await of all the promises, because after we push it, we need to wait for all those asynchronous functions to be completed. All right, let's see if this is working fine. All right, so after we save the changes, as you can see that test case has also passed. So we're on the right track right here. We now have covered the invalid data test case. Now what's the next test case that we need to do? Obviously, if you pass on valid data, then that should be created in the database. So let's do that. it should accept valid data. Just a recap, it should not accept invalid data. Now it should accept a valid data. So how can we create a valid data? So using the function I created, create link body, just to show you again, it's basically returning a name, a valid name, and a valid URL. So doing the same thing we did right here, passing the link body, and expect this status to be 201 because that's created, and expect the body to be, it returns us the body of the link that we have created. So we can do a 2 equal link body. Do 2 equal to link body, but this also returns us the ID of the created link. So we don't actually exactly know the ID. It can be it is a random generated one. So what we can do, we can pass, or we can spread the link body here and expect the ID is anything of a string. So similar to what we did right here. As long as it is a string, we are fine with that. And we can also make sure that this link that we have created is also created in the database. To do that, let's extract the ID that was returned in the response body. So this ID is equal to res body.id. And let's get the link using the links repository. Find one using the link ID. And then we can just basically do a comparison, equal comparison of the two objects, which is the rest body. So we have referenced the rest body a few times. It's just good to create a variable so that we only reference to that body itself. All right, so this should pass as well. As you can see, he has passed the test cases. Great. Now let's move on. So we should also handle the case. If you remember, when we create a link in the repository, we make sure that there's no duplicate in the code, in the links. So if there's two names that already exist, I mean, there's one name that already exists and we use it to create another one, we should get this error. So let's handle that case. So it should handle this error that we need to handle. So again, is it asynchronous function block? And let's first create an existing link. So remember, we have created a function, create link item. This basically creates a link directly to the database. We can use that. And obviously, it is a asynchronous function. You need to wait for it. Then our link body, it doesn't have to be, we don't have to use the name right here, but we just need the URL from this link body. I'm just going to use this. And again, let's make a REST request. Copy this. And the name will be using the existing link.name. And the URL is just from the link body URL. All right. So what should be the response right here? The status should be 409. Remember, 409 is the conflict error. And then the error from the body should be conflict. And lastly, the message, we created this custom message. Let's just copy this, and we expect that to be the same as the response body message. Let's try this out. And yeah, it already passed this test case. Great. So now for the last test case for the post, since we have a if condition right here, we also need to basically handle the else statement. And when you want to achieve 100% coverage, you basically need to cover the else condition as well, because all the lines right here except the else condition has not been covered yet. So let's just handle that here so we can achieve 100% coverage. So it should handle unexpected error. We'll do an asynchronous block, and what we need to do, basically we just need to return an error that doesn't meet this if condition. So how can we do that? In Jest, you can actually do mockings. You can basically spy, do a spy on to the links repository. This is the one that's calling, this is actually the links repository. We pass in the links repository. And the second argument would be the function itself. So the save. So we are spying on the save function right now. After you spy on it, you can actually mock the rejected value. So since this is an asynchronous, you can have resolved value or rejected value. So this will result in an error, and that will go to the try catch. So that the catch actually has an error object, which we can pass right here. I'm just going to use empty object. So basically, error.code would be undefined. Hence, it will go to the else condition. All right. And just a precaution right here. When you do a spy on, or you do mocks like this basically will affect any consecutive, any of the next test cases. So on the next test cases, so for example, next test cases right here, links repository that saved is still mocked unless we reset the value to its original state. So to revert it back, we just have to make sure that we call this mock restore so that it will be restored to its original state. So yeah, just make sure you call this at the end of the test case that you have done. All right, so now let's create a link body. All right, and we expect this response status to be 500. Expect the body, that message to be internal error. I think that this is the message. Let's save this and see what we get. All right, so it also passed as well. And we're done with the post links API. Next, what we want to do is basically write tests when deleting the function. Deleting the links. So links/links. Sorry, this should be links as well. So links delete. Do basically there are some validations in the delete function. Basically, if it's an invalid ID, we don't want that to pass through. So there are some cases where we just pass 1, 2, 3, ABC, those are not valid UUID. And again, I like to create a function because I'm going to reuse the invalid data in the update links. So I just want to create here, create invalid link IDs. So it can be a number, it can be just a word. Those are not valid IDs. So after that, I'm going to use it right here. Invalid data, create invalid links IDs. So this is going to be an array of invalid IDs. What we're going to do, create a promises again. So an array of promises, which is just void. We're not returning anything. And let's look into the invalid data. This will be the link ID. And I'm going to push a self-invoking asynchronous function. I await for that promise to be resolved before I move on to the next test case. Need to add asynchronous right here. All right. So in this case, I'm just going to copy this. And instead of post, we're going to do a delete. And it's not going to be just /links. It will be /links and the ID, which is what we're getting from the loop. All right. So after this, basically we just check that the status code is 400 because we don't accept invalid IDs. It needs to be rejected. And I'm just going to get the response body to make sure that we have the expected error. So this needs to be bad request. So expect the rest body to be, it will be an array of string. So we can just copy what we have done from here. This body, and this should pass. Oh, I forgot that we're inside a describe block. So this is not how you write test cases. We need to, it should not accept invalid ID. Then move everything that we have written inside the it or test case block. So it should not accept invalid ID. And this needs to be asynchronous. That's why we get this error. All right, so it did pass. Now we're ready to move to the next test case. Basically, it should accept, it should handle not found. So remember, if the ID doesn't exist, we should get a 404 error. So you can just generate a random link ID without creating one using faker data type .uuid. So this will generate a string in the UID form. So this ID won't exist because we didn't create this. This coming from the faker library. So again, let's do the same request and response body. And let's just copy this as well. And this should be 404. Error message should be not found. And remember, we have created a custom message right here. Let's make sure that we can do an equal string. And this should pass as well. We need to make this asynchronous. Let's see what's the response. All right, I forgot the asynchronous. So we need to save this again to rerun the test. And there you go. Should handle not found. Its OS is successful. So lastly, it should handle delete basically. We're done with the error handling. Now have to validate the happy path, which is to handle the delete. So to handle delete, we need to make sure that the link exists. So we need to create an existing link directly from the database. So remember, I created the create link item function, and then pass in the existing link ID. You can just make this link. ID is link.id. And yeah, we can get the response body. This should be 200. We don't need the response body because it doesn't return anything. And you can just make sure that in the database as well, it has been deleted. So to do that, we can directly make a call to the links repository. One with the link ID. So this deleted link should be undefined. If link repository didn't find it, it will return you undefined instead of the object. So to be undefined. Okay, let's save this, and this should pass. All right, so it passes well. It should handle delete. Is successful. We're now done with the delete API. So for the last feature of the links feature, we can handle updating the link. So that is a put request. It's going to be similar to what we have done above. So for the first one, it should handle invalid data. Invalid ID, similar to the delete. So I'm just going to copy this block and paste it right here. Replace it with a put. And yeah, I think that should be it. Let's see this pass. So I'm not adding the body here because anyway, it's not going to be run. We don't need to pass it because what we expect is invalid ID. All right, so that pass. Next, we want to do. So in the put request, we accept the update link body, which is name and URL. So similar to create link, we are expecting it to be a string for the name, and it should be a URL for the URL. So we can actually just copy what we have done for the post link, which is not to accept invalid data. All right, so I'm going to add it here. Just replace post with put. And this should be a link ID. So we can create a link ID over here. So I don't need to create a link yet in the database because anyway, it's not going to run because in the first place, we are already passing invalid data. So there won't be any interaction with the database. So I can just create a random UID. All right, so this should pass. So as you can see here, we are sending the payload in the put request. And it is invalid, so we are expecting it to be a bad request. All right, so it has passed as well. It should not accept invalid data. Okay, so it should also handle not found. Similar to what we did in the delete. Let's quickly see that. I'm just going to copy the same one as delete, but replace it with put. And we need to pass a valid payload. So to generate a link body, you can use the create link body function that I created. Send it to here. Oops, this is wrong. It should be like this. I'm not sure why it's doing that. Okay, it should be like this. All right. All right. So this should pass as well. And here we're not having a custom message. And this should actually be this body, that message. All right, so that passed as well. Now we're ready to really validate that our update links feature is working, so it should handle update. So similar to what we did in the delete, we need to create an existing link. It would be existing link. So instead of deleted link, this needs to be updated link. And we need to call the put function and also pass a new payload. So to create a new link body, create link body. So the beauty of using Faker, it always generates a random data that is different from what was used in the creating this link. So we can always make sure that they are not the same most of the time. Yeah, like 99%. So we just need to pass this and new link body, and we can validate the rest body equal. So we can still send the rest body, the new link body, but the ID shouldn't change. So we just pass the link ID right here. So because when we do an update, it passes us the new data of the link, but it is still using the same ID. So this is what we did right here. And this should not be as defined. This should be the rest body. So whatever was returned in the response, make sure that the updated link in the database is the same as what was passed. So let's quickly check this. All right, we need to, because this is an object, we cannot do the equality using just to be. We need to use toEqual to do a equality between objects or array. All right, so we are done, pretty much done with the links feature. We can now move on to the last part, or the last feature, which is the wildcard. So in the wildcard, just a recap, it basically handles the redirect. So what we need to do, basically, if the name doesn't exist, we should get a 404 error. If it does exist, then it should redirect. So just those two things. So let me just create a new file, wildcard.spec.ts. And I'm going to copy how I did the setup in the links. And let me just delete everything. We're done here. All right, so we have the setup. We don't need the invalid link IDs. We also don't need invalid link bodies. We do need this create link item to create the link body, but I'm not sure. I don't think I'm going to use this create link body. So I'm just going to pass this and don't need this function anymore. All right, so we need to update the links here. And yep, I think that's it for us. So let's add a describe block here. Basically, the wildcard name. So anything from slash, after the slash, we need to handle in this. And the first test case, we should handle not found. We don't need to create anything yet directly in the database. We don't need to call create link item yet. And if we try to call the get request, so request as in the application get HTTP server and do a get request. So in this case, it won't be, it will just be slash the short name. And we need to await this request. We expect the status to be 404. And the body that message should be found. So that's really it for the not found. Let's save these changes and see if this test case has passed. All right, and it did. As you can see, the wildcard.spec.ts has passed. So when you have multiple files, it doesn't log you the individuals anymore. So, but that's fine. The last thing we need to do is basically make sure that it redirects. So this is going to be our last test case. We are pretty much done here. So just the last one should handle redirect. Synchronous block. And yeah, we need to create the link. Create link item. And this is going to be a request. And instead of the show name, we use the link, the existing link name. The status should be 301, which is a permanent redirect. And then how do we make sure that we are redirected to the correct URL? So usually it will be in the headers of the response. And then under the headers will be the location. So you just make sure that the location is the same as the link.url. And that way we know that it's redirecting to that URL. So once you save the changes, this should pass. And yeah, there you go. It's also passing. All right. So to conclude this video, I just want to quickly show you the coverage of after we have written the test cases for links and wildcard. So just have to run this command. Docker compose, test, and cov. Yep, and there you go. Look at that. It's so nice to see all 100% coverage with just 2 files. So this is what I like about writing end-to-end tests, because you just have to write one file for all the features. If you want to achieve 100% coverage in unit testing, you probably have to create individual spec files for each of these features. But for end-to-end tests, you just have to write one and it covers everything. So yeah, I hope that you learned a lot from this video. And yeah, don't forget to share it with your friends or colleagues who you might think will learn a lot from this video. And yeah, once again, thank you so much. And don't forget to subscribe and like this video. And see you in the next video. Bye.